She was not Egyptian, but she ruled Egypt. She did not conquer Rome, but Rome went to war because of her. And when they finally defeated her, they didn't celebrate. They erased her. Why? Because Cleopatra knew something so dangerous that even the Roman Empire could not allow it to survive. And for 2,000 years, the world has been asking the wrong questions. Not who she loved, not how she looked, but this: what made Rome afraid of her? Because Cleopatra was not just a queen. She was a threat. And this is the story they tried to bury. To understand Cleopatra, you must first understand what she was born into. 300 years before she drew her first breath, one of Alexander the Great's generals seized control of Egypt. His name was Ptolemy. He was Greek. His family was Greek. His language was Greek. His culture was Greek. And for 300 years, every single ruler of Egypt refused to speak a single word of Egyptian. They ruled a country whose language they considered beneath them. They kept the bloodline pure through a practice so disturbing it shaped the very fate of Cleopatra herself. Brothers married sisters. Uncles married nieces. The Ptolemies did not marry outside the family. Not out of love, not out of tradition, out of power. Because if you married outside the bloodline, you created rivals, and rivals in the Ptolemaic dynasty did not survive. The history of the dynasty Cleopatra was born into is a history of assassination, of poisoning, of siblings killing siblings, of children ordering the deaths of their own parents. This was not a family. This was a war, fought in palace corridors, behind closed doors, with poison instead of swords. Into this world, in approximately 69 BC, Cleopatra VII was born. Not the oldest child, not the expected heir, but from the very first moment she opened her eyes, she was surrounded by people who would kill her if given the chance. We know almost nothing about Cleopatra's childhood. The records don't exist, or if they did, they were lost or destroyed. What we do know is what she became. By the time she was a teenager, Cleopatra could speak 9 languages: Egyptian, Latin, Greek, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Parthian, Median. She was the first ruler of her dynasty in 300 years to bother learning Egyptian. That single fact tells you everything about who she was. While every other Ptolemy looked down at the people they ruled, Cleopatra studied them, learned their language, understood their religion, attended their temples. She wasn't trying to be popular. She was building power, real power, the kind that doesn't need soldiers to enforce it, the kind that lives in the hearts of the people. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was not a strong man. The Egyptians had a nickname for him: Auletes, the flute player, not a compliment. While Rome grew stronger every year, while the empire expanded and swallowed kingdoms whole, Ptolemy XII paid tribute, bribed senators, begged for recognition. He spent so much of Egypt's gold keeping Rome friendly that the people of Alexandria revolted, drove him out of the country. And while her father fled to Rome in humiliation, a teenage Cleopatra remained in Egypt, watching, learning, understanding exactly what her father had done wrong. When he returned 3 years later, propped up by Roman soldiers he had paid for with Egyptian gold, Cleopatra was there, still watching, still learning, and beginning to plan. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BC, Cleopatra was 18 years old. His will named 2 co-rulers, Cleopatra and her younger brother. His name was Ptolemy XIII. He was 10 years old, a 10-year-old boy and an 18-year-old woman, ruling the wealthiest kingdom in the ancient world. You might think that gave Cleopatra the advantage. It did not, because behind that 10-year-old boy stood 3 of the most dangerous men in Egypt: his tutor, his military commander, and his chief eunuch. 3 men who had no interest in sharing power with a woman. 3 men who believed a queen was a problem to be solved. For 3 years, Cleopatra held on. She minted coins showing only her own face. She signed documents in her name alone. She presented herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, not just a queen, a goddess walking among men. But the 3 men behind her brother were patient. In 48 BC they moved. Cleopatra was exiled from Egypt, the queen of Egypt thrown out of her own kingdom by a 10-year-old boy, and the men who controlled him. She fled to the eastern border. She gathered what remained of her supporters. She began building an army. And then Rome arrived. Julius Caesar, the name that changed everything. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria. Not to conquer Egypt. He was chasing a man, his rival, his enemy, his equal, Pompey the Great. Caesar and Pompey had been fighting a civil war for control of Rome. And Pompey had fled to Egypt, believing the young king would protect him. He was wrong. The advisors behind Ptolemy XIII made a calculation. Caesar was winning the war. Helping Pompey was backing the losing side. So when Pompey stepped off his boat onto Egyptian soil, they killed him. They cut off his head, preserved it, and presented it to Caesar as a gift. Caesar wept, not because he mourned Pompey, but because this was not how great men were supposed to die. And now Caesar was in Alexandria, in the royal palace, with an army, and Ptolemy's advisors had made him angry. Cleopatra understood something in that moment that no one else had seen. Caesar was not an ally of her brother. He was not an enemy yet. He was an opportunity. But she was in exile, on the wrong side of the border. Her brother's men controlled every entrance to the palace. If she tried to enter Alexandria, she would be captured and executed. So Cleopatra did something that people have been arguing about for 2,000 years. She had herself smuggled into the palace, rolled inside a carpet or a linen sack. The ancient sources disagree on the exact details. But what they all agree on is that one moment Caesar was alone in his chambers, and the next she was standing in front of him. Think about the courage that required. She was 21 years old, exiled, hunted, with no army, no allies inside the city. She had just smuggled herself past enemy soldiers into the chambers of the most powerful man in the world. If Caesar had been angry, if he had seen her as a threat, if he had simply called his guards, she would have died there, in that room. Unknown, forgotten. He did not call his guards. What happened in that room? No one recorded. What we know is what came after. Caesar declared himself the arbiter of the dispute between the siblings. He summoned Ptolemy XIII to the palace. He demanded the civil war end. He demanded Cleopatra be restored. Ptolemy's advisors were furious. They had made their calculations. They had killed Pompey to please Caesar. They had given him a gift, and now Caesar was taking their queen's side. The city of Alexandria erupted. Caesar and Cleopatra were trapped in the royal palace, surrounded by an Egyptian army. Ptolemy's forces controlled the harbor, cut off their supply lines. Caesar made a decision that has been called either genius or madness. He set fire to the Egyptian fleet. The fire spread, and according to some ancient sources, it spread to the great library of Alexandria, the greatest collection of human knowledge ever assembled. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the accumulated wisdom of centuries, gone, or perhaps not gone. Historians still argue about this. Some believe only part of the library burned. Others believe the main library survived for centuries more. But that argument is for another video. What matters now is this. Trapped, surrounded, outnumbered, Caesar and Cleopatra held on. Roman reinforcements arrived. The Egyptian army was defeated. Ptolemy XIII fled. His body was found in the Nile, drowned, his golden armor weighing him down. Cleopatra was queen, the sole ruler of Egypt, 21 years old. Now here is where history made its first great mistake. For 2,000 years, writers have described Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar as seduction, as if everything she achieved was because she was beautiful, as if power came to her through a man's bed and not through her own mind. Let us be precise about what actually happened. Cleopatra was a trained political strategist, a linguist, a diplomat, an administrator who managed the most complex economy in the ancient world. Caesar was 52 years old. He had fought in more wars than most men see in a lifetime. He had read every philosophical text in the Roman world. He was not a man who was easily impressed, and yet he stayed in Egypt for 9 months. 9 months, while Rome needed him, while wars waited, while senators grew anxious. He stayed. They sailed the Nile together on a royal barge, two of the most powerful minds of the ancient world in conversation. What did they talk about? No one recorded it. And that silence is one of history's greatest losses. She had a son. She named him Ptolemy Caesar. The people called him Caesarion, Little Caesar. Caesar never publicly acknowledged the child. In Rome, he already had a wife, and in Rome, Cleopatra was becoming a problem. Caesar brought Cleopatra to Rome. He installed her in his villa across the Tiber River, in plain sight. Rome was not pleased. The senators whispered. The people stared. The poets wrote poisonous verses. Here was a foreign queen, living in the home of Rome's most powerful man, with a child who bore his name. And Caesar seemed unconcerned. He had a golden statue of Cleopatra placed in the Temple of Venus. A golden statue of a living foreign queen in Rome's most sacred temple. The senators began to talk about something else, something darker. There were rumors that Caesar intended to make himself king, that Cleopatra had whispered this ambition into his ear, that together they would rule not just Egypt, but Rome, and through Rome, the world. On the 15th of March in the year 44 BC, Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times on the floor of the Senate by men he had called friends. Cleopatra was still in Rome when it happened. The man who had restored her throne, the father of her child, her only protection in the most dangerous city in the world, gone. She left Rome within days, sailed back to Egypt, with her son and no allies, and an uncertain future. Rome was now at war with itself again, and Cleopatra had to decide which side to back. And then Mark Antony sent for her. Mark Antony, Caesar's greatest general, his most loyal soldier, the man who had delivered the speech at Caesar's funeral that turned Rome against his assassins. After Caesar's death, Rome was divided between 3 men: Antony, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, and Lepidus. They called themselves the Second Triumvirate, 3 men dividing the Roman world between them. Antony took the east. Egypt was in the east. He summoned Cleopatra to the city of Tarsus to answer for her role during the Civil War, to explain why she had not provided more support. In other words, to be interrogated, to be judged, possibly to be punished. She made him wait. Days passed. Antony sat on his throne in the marketplace, expecting an Egyptian queen to arrive and bow before him. She did not bow. When Cleopatra finally arrived at Tarsus, she came on a barge with purple sails, perfumed with incense, the oars dipped in silver, flutes and harps playing, and Cleopatra herself, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, lying beneath a canopy of gold cloth, attended by servants dressed as sea nymphs and cupids. The people of Tarsus ran to the waterfront to see her arrive. The marketplace where Antony sat emptied. He was left sitting on his throne, alone, while everyone in the city rushed to see the queen. She had not come to be judged. She had come to make him come to her. He did. What followed was 10 years of the most extraordinary political partnership in ancient history. They were not simply lovers. They were co-rulers of a vision, a new kind of empire, one that merged the power of Rome with the wealth and ancient authority of Egypt. Antony gave Cleopatra territories, Cyprus, parts of modern-day Lebanon and Syria, portions of Judea, the cedar forests of Cilicia. These were not gifts, they were strategic alliances. Because Egypt's wealth and supply lines were essential to Antony's military campaigns in the east. Cleopatra funded his armies, supplied his ships, provided the grain that kept his soldiers alive. In return, Antony used Rome's military power to protect Egypt and to expand her territories. They had 3 children together, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and a younger son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. And in a ceremony in Alexandria that the Romans would later call the Donations of Alexandria, Antony divided the eastern territories of Rome and gave them to Cleopatra's children. In Rome, this was not received well. In Rome, there was a man watching all of this. A young, cold, calculating man. His name was Octavian. Octavian understood something that Antony had forgotten. Romans did not fear military defeat. They feared foreign influence. So Octavian did not declare war on Antony. He declared war on Cleopatra. He told the Roman Senate that Antony had been bewitched, that a foreign queen had stolen his mind, that Rome's greatest general had become a slave to an Egyptian sorceress. He published Antony's will, illegally obtained from the sacred vault of the Vestal Virgins. The will stated that Antony wished to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra. Rome erupted, a Roman general, wishing to be buried in a foreign land, beside a foreign queen. It was the final blow. The Senate declared war. In 31 BC, at the Battle of Actium, off the western coast of Greece, the fleets of Antony and Cleopatra faced the fleet of Octavian. What happened at Actium is still debated. Some historians say Cleopatra's ships fled the battle, that she panicked, that Antony followed her and abandoned his men. Others believe something far more strategic occurred, that Cleopatra's withdrawal was calculated, that she saw the battle was lost and chose to preserve what she could. The treasury, the fleet, the children. The truth may never be known. What we know is this: after Actium, everything changed. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria. Octavian was coming. The question now was not whether Egypt would fall. It was what would happen to Cleopatra when it did. She had options. She had been in contact with Octavian secretly, negotiating, trying to find terms. But Octavian's terms were not terms. They were demands. Cleopatra began moving her treasury, gold, jewels, silver, into a monument she was building near the Temple of Isis. Some historians believe she intended to burn it all, destroy Egypt's wealth rather than let Rome take it. Antony fought on. A skirmish here, a rearguard action there. It was hopeless. And then, someone told Antony that Cleopatra was dead. She was not dead. She was in her monument, alive. But whether the message was sent by her, or whether it was a mistake, or whether it was something darker, no one knows. What we know is what Antony did. He fell on his sword. He did not die immediately. He was carried to Cleopatra's monument, hoisted up through a window, into her arms. He died there, in her arms, in Alexandria, as he had wished. Octavian entered Alexandria. He came to Cleopatra's monument. He sent messengers. He made promises. She would be treated with dignity. She would be preserved. She would be taken to Rome. He did not say what would happen in Rome. He did not need to. Cleopatra knew. In a Roman triumph, a conquered ruler was paraded through the streets, in chains, Before cheering crowds, she had already seen what that looked like. Her younger sister Arsinoe, whom Caesar had paraded through Rome in chains 15 years earlier. The crowds had not cheered, they had wept, because Arsinoe was young and thin, and she walked with dignity despite the chains. Cleopatra was 39 years old. She had ruled Egypt for 22 years. She had faced assassination plots, civil wars, the deaths of the two most powerful men she had ever known. She had survived everything, and now, the only thing left to survive was Octavian's triumph. She refused. On the 12th of August, in the year 30 BC, Cleopatra bathed. She dressed in her royal robes, put on her crown, her jewels. She ate a meal. She wrote a letter to Octavian, a single request, that she be buried beside Antony. And then Cleopatra died. How she died is one of history's greatest mysteries. The ancient sources say a snake, an asp, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. But here is what the ancient sources don't explain. There was no snake found in the room. The two servants who died with her showed no bite marks. An asp bite is painful, agonizing, not peaceful. Modern scholars have proposed alternatives, a mixture of poisons applied to a pin, concealed in her hair. Or perhaps the asp story was exactly what she wanted people to believe. Because in Egyptian mythology, the cobra was the symbol of divine royalty, the uraeus, the sacred serpent worn on the crown of pharaohs. If Cleopatra died by the cobra, she died as a goddess, not a conquered queen, not a prisoner, a goddess, returning to the divine realm, on her own terms. Even in death, she was controlling the narrative. Octavian read her letter. He honored her request. Cleopatra was buried beside Antony, in a tomb that has never been found. Octavian then did what conquerors always do. He erased her. He killed Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, the boy who was 17 years old, the boy whose only crime was his bloodline. An advisor told Octavian something cold and precise. Too many Caesars is not a good thing. The boy was executed. Cleopatra's other children were taken to Rome, paraded in the triumph that she had refused to attend, in golden chains, because even in death she could not be humiliated. So he humiliated her children instead. Egypt became a Roman province. Its grain fed the Roman Empire for centuries. Its wealth funded Octavian's rise to become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Roman Empire was built on Egyptian gold, Cleopatra's gold. Now let us talk about the lie. For 2,000 years, Cleopatra has been described primarily through her relationships with men. Caesar's lover, Antony's queen, as if those were her defining achievements. Here is what those 2,000 years of writers left out. She was a trained philosopher, a student of mathematics and astronomy. She wrote treatises on medicine and alchemy. She reformed Egypt's economy, expanded its trade networks, managed the most complex administrative system in the ancient world. She navigated 22 years of some of the most volatile politics in history and kept her kingdom intact for most of them. Caesar and Antony were not her protectors, they were her instruments. She chose them, used them, and when they were gone, she refused to be used in return. The Roman writers who shaped her reputation for centuries were the same Romans who defeated her. You do not let your enemy tell your story. And yet for 2,000 years that is exactly what happened. History was written by Octavian's poets, by men who needed her to be a seductress, a sorceress, a foreign temptress who corrupted Roman men, because the alternative was too dangerous. The alternative was the truth, that she was smarter than Caesar, more strategically brilliant than Antony, and that the only reason Rome won was numbers, not intelligence, not courage, not leadership, just numbers. Her tomb has never been found. In 2022, archaeologists in Egypt announced the possible discovery of a tunnel beneath the Temple of Taposiris Magna, near Alexandria, a tunnel running nearly a mile underground, carved through solid rock, at a depth of 65 feet. The lead archaeologist believes that Cleopatra and Antony may be buried somewhere along this tunnel. The excavation is ongoing, as we speak, somewhere beneath the Egyptian sand in a chamber that has not been opened in 2,000 years. There may be a tomb, with 2 names on the wall, and inside, the remains of a queen, a woman who spoke 9 languages, who ruled for 22 years, who faced down the entire might of Rome, and who refused, at the very end, to give her enemies the satisfaction. Her face has also never been confirmed. Ancient coins show a woman with a strong nose, a prominent jaw, features that would not match the Hollywood image. Plutarch, who wrote about her a century after her death, said that her beauty was not remarkable in itself. What was irresistible was the force of her presence, the sound of her voice, the quality of her mind. That is Cleopatra, not the painting, not the movie, not the myth, the woman underneath. Rome won. Rome always wins, until it doesn't, because here is what the Roman Empire left behind: ruins, and here is what Cleopatra left behind. 2,000 years of people still arguing about who she really was. Statues, films, paintings, operas, novels, debates, discoveries. The most powerful empire in history tried to erase her, and instead made her immortal. Somewhere beneath Alexandria, a door has not been opened in 2,000 years. When it finally opens, and it will, the world will have to ask itself, what else did we get wrong? You've just seen a piece of history. Most people never will, and this is just the beginning. On Past Matters, we dive into untold stories, hidden truths, and the mysteries history left behind. Like, subscribe, and don't miss what comes next.